Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here bright and early. We are here for a panel about how to design better horror games, and we have some illustrious people here to help you with that. We have Cody Pondsmith, who is the lead designer of The Witcher, our Telsorian Games, and I mean, a member of one of the finest gaming dynasties in history. We have Banana Chan, she, they, he. I'm sorry, Cody's pronouns are he and him. Banana Chan is she, they, he. Canadian Cantonese game designer, um, designer of Jingshe, Blood on the Banquet Hall. Also worked on Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, Betrayal at the House of the Hill, third edition. And we have Steffie Vaan of Angry Hamster Publishing, and she is a horror designer from the Netherlands who has worked for Modifius, Chaosium, Onyx Path. Anyone that makes scary games, Steffie has written words or put the even more dreaded red text next to those words for. So, bunch of experienced designers here. We're going to just jump right in, and starting with Banana, we're going to talk about what's alluring about the horror genre in the mediums that it exists in, movies, fiction, and then what's alluring about taking the passive watching horror, reading it, and turning it into something that you're actually creating at the table. So why do we like being scared?
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think that for me personally, I find it to be a really cathartic experience, just like experiencing horror. I think that horror lets us talk about things that we normally don't talk about. So whether that's trauma, whether that's, something like psychological, I feel like horror gives us that platform where we're able to not only discuss these things, but also just chat about how has this experience impacted my life. So I think that that's what is so alluring to horror, for me, to horror. And I'm sure our other panelists can talk about that as well.
Jump in.
Yeah,
Right.
You go first, I'll go last.
I definitely agree. I think one of the cool parts about horror, especially in the tabletop space, is that it's this really primal emotion which really kind of gets to the core of a character. If you have players who are really into it and a GM who can really carry it, it's a really amazing key to just bringing out the best in a lot of people's characters, getting down to the heart of what they're playing, and in a lot of places to the heart of the people you're playing with.
Yeah, the thing that I love about horror is that I'm scared of a lot of things, and some of them are nonsense. I'm scared of writing emails to people, terrifying. And I'm scared of real things, like I'm a woman in the world, that's terrifying. And I really enjoy being scared in a way that I consent to by something that cannot actually hurt me. I love that. That is so cathartic. And I love exploring that in games because I love games. So the fact that it's happening to my character doesn't negate the boundaries of I consented to it. And it might have an emotional bleed on me, but it can't really hurt me because I know that the GM is going to stop when I tell them to. I mean, they better should.
Can we drill a little further into that, and what's the difference between, is there a difference between scaring a character and scaring a player? And are both of those things what we're looking for when we're playing a tabletop game? Do we the person want to be a little bit uncomfortable? And Cody, you seem kind of gleeful at this, so why don't you start?
I think that they're definitely not the same thing, and this is one of those tricky situations where you often have to gauge who you're playing with. There are people who want to come to the table to play their character, and if their character gets scared, that's fine. but they're not maybe in for the possible nightmares and lingering effect, shall we say, of being scared themselves. And then players who are absolutely down for I want to genuinely be unnerved. My personal game group has a few splits like that, where I have players who are in for whatever is going to happen. They are fully invested in their character. They are in that headspace, and if they get scared, that's great. But I think that kind of taps into the fact that horror in the many themes of tabletop is one of those where you kind of have to feel out who you're playing with, because it can be a really personal thing, and you have to kind of make sure everybody's on board,
Yes.
if you're gonna go that deep into it.
Yes. I will say I love being scared in a game. And I love scaring my players a little, but I will ask people about, what are my no-go zones? Like yesterday, I was on a panel with somebody and they didn't like mushrooms growing out of bodies. And I do have a tendency to go in with, fungi growing on corpses. I love that. I don't know why. I love the visual. But obviously then in a game with that person, I wouldn't do that. I would find something else that is also scary and disturbing. But I think it's fine to scare the player a little if the player signed up for it. And you'll have to accept there are some people that you just can't scare no matter what you do. They're like, this is not real. Okay, but imagine that. No, this is not real. I mean, I guess if they still enjoy the game that way, but I personally do think it's fine to scare your players a little.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what everyone's saying. Like it does. I think that like we have that parallel between sex and role-playing games like all the time. And I think specifically for horror games, that parallel is very strong, just because like when we talk about sex, we talk about consent, we talk about like, if we, want to do something in a role-playing scene or in a scene in general, like we have to make sure that everyone is consenting to this specific situation, right? So in horror, I think that it's good to have those calibration tools. So like having the X card, having like, lines and veils beforehand, so that everyone like is experiencing the thing that they want to experience. Like that's something that I think that is really important, because like, even though you want to have, scary games, you want your players to be scared. You don't want them to be like traumatized at the table, or like, have them like, terrified of playing with the same group again, or terrified of playing with you again, if you're a GM. And so I think it's really important to like make sure that while it's good to like, like everyone has been saying, like while it's good to like have everyone be a little bit scared, especially if they're like really excited for it, especially if they're like really interested in that, making sure that we still have those lines and veils, we still have like the X card, we still have like the O card if everyone's giving the green light, and making sure that like everyone is playing safely.
Well, very good there. Yeah, I mean, we go ahead, Cody.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think to just, I guess, kind of put a button on it. I think it's especially tricky because at the root of horror, a lot of the things that you will be kind of using to scare your players are rooted in fears and traumas that we genuinely, or some of us may genuinely have. I have people in my gaming group who have had traumatic events happen in their past, and I make a point not to reference things related to that. So, it is such a personal thing.
Yeah, it's a bit like you can love horror. I love it, but I still check, does the dog die for certain triggers before I watch a movie, because I want to know. And there will be days where I'm like, no, I'm absolutely not. And there will be moments like, okay, now that I know that this is going to happen, I'm going to take a deep breath and it's going to be fine. But yeah, it's fine to say I love being scared, but you don't need to come in with certain topics.
Yeah, I mean, personally, for the longest time, I didn't really think that I liked horror movies specifically. And then I discovered that what I didn't really like was gore. But when I started like switching over to watching films that were more suspense based and more, I'm going to say more cerebral, but that sounds kind of snooty, and that's not what I'm trying to get at. I just want to be scared. I was like, oh, stuff's really good. I've missed out. I have a couple decades backlog of things to go and check out and see if those will scare me appropriately.
Yes.
So we have a wide variety of types of games that y'all have designed. As I said earlier, Cody's worked on The Witcher, which is, based on a series of novels. So there's the licensing tie-in. Steffie has also done a lot of licensed tie-in things and like World of Darkness, genre games that have a very long canon. And working in a long canon, gives you different constraints. And Banana has a series of unique games, but has also worked on licensed material too. So I'd like to talk a bit about how do you approach horror design within those different constraints. I won't talk anymore. Banana, go ahead.
I definitely think that it can be different working with like a licensed property, right? You have your various things that you have to basically like keep within the constraints of like the property. So like, say for example, I'm not going to name the property, but a property a while ago that I was about to work on, they requested no alligators. And so I was just like, okay, so that's one thing that I have to keep out of this specific property, even though like the property itself does have characters that are crocodiles or alligators in it. So it was a little strange, but I think that those are sometimes like constraints that we have to work with as creators, as developers, as designers. I think on the other end of the spectrum, like designing your own original IP, that's a little, even though that's like very freeing, like you can do whatever you want basically. I still think that like sometimes when you have too much freedom, it does sort of mess with the creative process, because then you're just like, okay, like what do I work on? Like, how do I make this thing? Like there are no constraints, there are no guardrails. I could just do whatever. And that like, I guess like it does give you like a little bit of analysis paralysis. But I think like once you have some guidelines that you set for yourself, then it's a little bit easier for you to work around the thing that you want to create.
And I think a design partner comes in help, because I've worked on a lot of licensed properties, but one of the indie games I designed is City of Flesh, and it's about a city built into the rotting womb of a dying colossus, and the ages are shifting. So we're going from the age of magic to the age of science. And the thing is that the city can only exist at that exact shift, because in the age of magic, colossuses don't die. So you can't build a city on their corpse. And in the age of science, colossuses don't exist. So you can't build a city on their corpse. So the city is stuck in that very specific moment. And outside of that moment, it can't exist. But yeah, so my visual was, it's a city built in the womb of a dead colossus. And I just had that visual. And then my design partner, Liz Bridco, came in and she was like, yeah, but what is the game about? It's about a city in the womb of a colossus. No, Steffie, what is the game about? And then we came up with, it's about that doom. It's about the fact that this city can only exist at this very specific time. So you're playing towards an end. So when you are given complete creative license, or you take it, and you come up with a really wacky idea, a design partner really helps to make you sit down and go, okay, but what is the core of this game? What is the driving conflict?
I think my experience working on Witcher is kind of interesting, because you talked about the novels, and there's actually just so much material related to the world of The Witcher in novels and the video games and spin-off video games, and even TV shows and things like that, which, while they're not directly in our canon, we reference. But it's actually, you play an interesting game in the Witcher setting of referencing all of these things, going through all of these books and finding all of the points, and maintaining the sort of inherent mystery in the setting. Especially in the novels, the original author, Andrzej Sapkowski, kind of goes out of his way not to explain a lot of things. And working with CD Projekt Red, working on the Witcher TRPG, there's an incentive to kind of keep that mystery. I think in TRPGs there's kind of a focus on explaining as much as possible so that the players can very easily pick it up. But in the Witcher, there is this like kind of veil of secrecy where we've kind of said we could explain this thing, but we shouldn't, because it kind of needs to remain mysterious. And it's an interesting balance between what do I explain and what do I leave mysterious. And that, I think that kind of lends to the horror of the setting in a lot of places, because a lot of horror really thrives on the mystery. You know, we have a lot of subjects, especially regarding magic and the darker magics in Witcher, that I have personal concepts of what they mean and, you know, why they exist and whatnot, but we're never going to say it, because that's not the way the setting should be handled. And it allows for this sort of mysterious edges and pockets in the setting that players can kind of play with.
I think, frankly, Cody, that answer just sent my mind reeling in like multiple directions in a really good way. And I feel like that is an advantage that visual media has over tabletop games and over novels and short stories and maybe some other forms of horror, in that you get to involve all of the senses, and you could it's not that it's easy to make a TV show. That's not what I'm saying. But in a TV show, it's easy to drop a few little hints in there that somebody can pick up over time, whether it's they see a certain pattern of things or whether there's, you know, archetypally a certain sound. And at the gaming table, that's hard to communicate without it being overly obvious, because gaming is more direct. You are telling people this is what you're seeing and hearing, and you're generally not giving 5-minute long monologues about like what you're doing when it doesn't seem like it's important. Now you need to figure out like what was the important bit. You know, you're not. So let's jump from that to like, how can a tabletop game foster a feeling of fear, dread, mystery, and help lead people to the right points? And should we be doing that in flavor, like we were just talking about? Should the DM be doing some monologuing? Or is there mechanical ways, good ways to make that happen? And Banana, you were nodding along, so
yeah,
first.
I definitely want to touch on like the importance of other types of media first. So I think that it's really important that like we have, I think the great thing that we have right now with like TV shows and movies is that like there's so much of it that when we consume these pieces of media, we automatically have touchstones. So when we get into play, when we get into like a tabletop role-playing game session, we can automatically pull from that and say like, actually, this game is sort of like what you're experiencing is kind of like maybe that Nicolas Cage movie, Mandy. Like imagine that. That's the vibe or the tone that we're setting here. And so I think we do owe a little bit to different kinds of media, trying to like pull in those touchstones. In terms of like designing for trying to create like a more immersive style of play, I think that for one of our games, Deimos Academy, which is designed by myself, Austin Taylor, and Amanda Call, what we did was we basically asked players to create their own fears. And so this is a collaborative storytelling game versus like a game with like a GM. This is more like on the onus of like the players to create the things that they want to see in the game. So say their player really, really wants to see like something like ghosts, right? Like your player really wants to see ghosts. Their character is terrified of ghosts. So we're going to integrate that into the game. And also, we're also going to have like a deck of memory cards that we create ourselves. So we have a good memory, a scary memory, and a bad memory. And that way we can like sort of have the players generate their own fears, have the players generate like the things that they want to see themselves. And we have this mechanic where, like, you know, when something happens, and this is sort of like playing around with the idea of player agency as well, where if you fail a roll, you get to take one of the cards and rip it up, and that's like a memory that you've forgotten. And so that sort of like gives a player a bit of agency over their own character, but at the same time, that deck of cards is created by the entire table, and so they're shuffled together, and it could be your memory that is being forgotten, or like, you know, something that you've like written in the past that's like being destroyed.
Interesting. Steffi, do you want to speak to that, or shall I?
No, I think that's a fabulous mechanic. This one of the scariest things that had happened to me as a player was, it was a really throwaway moment, but it worked so well to get me into the adventure. It was a Call of Cthulhu game, and my character was at a sandwich shop ordering a sandwich, and so I gave my order, and the DM said, "Oh, you want a Soggoth sandwich?" And I was like, "What?" And the DM was like, "Yeah, the egg sandwich." And it happened so naturally and quickly that I wasn't sure if the DM did he just say York Soggoth sandwich? Did I hear that correctly? And that really got me in my character, because I was so confused. I was like, did I hear you correctly? Did you actually say that? Because he immediately went, "No, an egg sandwich is what you ordered." Yes. So I think role playing, obviously, but small touches, like you don't even have to go for the big moments, because horror relies a lot on what people don't see. For example, I love The House on Haunted Hill, The Haunting of Hill House. It's one of my favorite pieces of horror media. And you have all of these ghosts in the background that the characters don't see, which is also why, I don't know, as a viewer, I was very much playing Spot the Ghost, but the characters don't see that. So that is really hard to get into a horror game, because how do I describe something that the character doesn't see without the player immediately go, "Yeah, I'm going over to the corner where you said the ghost was." Yeah, but you didn't see the ghost. Why are you? So that's very hard. So I think it's fine to build the horror up in the small moments, like you catch a glimpse of something in the mirror, but you're not sure if you saw it, or you overhear the waitress asking if you want a York Soggoth sandwich. Just small moments, I think really help build the atmosphere.
I definitely agree. I think that horror, I think the interaction of horror and mechanics is kind of tricky. I think that you kind of have to, a lot of the vibe has to be in the flavor, and in a lot of cases you have to have a really good GM to carry that. You know, a good GM can make anything a horror game if they want. And I think that the inherent nature of horror can be tricky in mechanics, because you either have to go very subtle, or you have to go all out. Because if you're going all out, then everybody's here for it. You know, you've all bought into this very prominent horror mechanic. You know, say for instance, like the sanity mechanic in Call of Cthulhu, or you know, something in that vein, where it's a very hyper integral part of the setting. Or you have to go very subtle, in just like little mechanical touches here and there, like for instance, Pathfinder 2's fear mechanic, where it's just like a negative to your rolls against the target of your fear. Because I feel like there's kind of that in between of we're not all totally bought in, but it's also not very subtle. And the problem is that so much of horror game design relies on kind of taking agency from players if it's in the design aspect of it. And players hate to lose agency in most circumstances unless they have consented to losing that agency. So you have to be really careful about your mechanic, because it can very easily, you know, I, for instance, was terrible for that, because I absolutely cannot stand being helpless in situations unless, you know, I put myself there. So I've had games where somebody has played around with that and I just absolutely shut me down. So you have to be really, I think it's easier to do it in the flavor than it is in the system. But if you're going to do it in the system, it can really inform the gameplay, as long as kind of everybody knows where they are.
Yeah, I've had players request that I don't use Faer, the spell. Is it a spell magic effect in Pathfinder?
Yeah.
I've had players ask if I could please, like, we know this monster could do it, but could you please not? Because they hated it. Like the running away for so many rounds and then running back for so many rounds. And they did not like it. It wasn't scary to them. It was just highly annoying, which, yeah, I get that. But I will say an example of a mechanic that I think does it mostly well is Dread with the Jenga stones that you pull. I love that because you have the physical suspense of the tower that's about to fall, but you do need the right group because otherwise it just turns into a game of Jenga. And I think that 10 candles, because the darkness is physically setting in because you're blowing out all of these candles, I think that does really well. And I do try to play with that. I designed a LARP. It's a summer camp murder LARP where one of you killed someone and you're trying to figure out who did it. It's called Camp Pleasant. And it's a LARP. Somebody died and you're trying to figure out which person at the table is the murderer. And I do recommend in the setup, like, if you can play this outside in the dark, you should. Because please make it like because the game it's the last day of camp. You're coming all together with the counselors. So if you can reenact that, but that is so hard. Like, how often do you have like woods handy where you can go and set a fire? That is so hard. But if you can, yeah, physical things do help. Better than mechanics, I think. Go ahead, Banana.
Can we continue talking about LARP for a second? I don't want to derail the conversation.
Yes.
Oh no, go for it.
Okay, cool. I love LARP for that specific reason, Steffi, because I think that like the immersiveness really brings you into like the space, right? I played this game called As We Know It from a while ago. I think it won a Golden Cobra Challenge from like 2015 or 2016. It's by Avon. And basically you are sitting in a dark closet the entire time you play and you're texting.
Oh, I love that.
Oh God, okay.
I want to do that.
It is very, very good. It's up for free on the Golden Cobra Challenge website. And basically it's so good. And you're stuck in this closet because there was an alien invasion. And basically it's like the final days and you're just like, you're not sure if you can come out, if it's safe to come out, you're running low on supplies, like you don't know what's going on. And all you have is your phone. And that's the only little bit of light that you have. And so you're texting away in this closet as the GM is like feeding prompts through text message. So there'll be text messages saying stuff like, it's safe to like come out now, but is it really like, and also we're going to connect you with another player who is, but also this is going to be all immersive, right? So it'd be like another person, another survivor who wants to speak with you. They may or may not be like an alien. They may be trying to trick you, right? So you don't know. And I think that when we incorporate like experimental sort of like LARP mechanics, it makes things like so much more immersive and so much more exciting.
Yeah, I will say if you have to do it through mechanics, then obviously go ahead and try. But I think mechanics are probably the weakest tool you have for building horror. Yeah, I have a journaling LARP, a solo game where everybody in the world went away. And you are discovering the world, and I'll give you little prompts and you have to write them down in a journal. It comes with a disclaimer to please. It was at the start of the pandemic when I wrote this. So I put in a disclaimer that says, please make sure you're in the right headspace, because the game will have you physically retreat to a place where there are no people to journal for like 15 minutes to 20 minutes. And if you can also do something with like white noise so that you don't hear anyone, that's even better. And then you go through these journaling prompts. Which is the same idea. We're trying to build the experience rather than give you mechanics. I want you to get into the character. Like, you might be the only person left in the world, so now what?
I love that.
Yeah, this is very cool.
Lockdown vibes.
Spinning off that a little bit. So, does anyone have feelings about whether a horror game is more fun or better if you're doing it in person, or has the modern technology, Zoom calls and that sort of stuff for gaming, has that made horror maybe not better, but different, because each player can appropriately set their own mood. And you don't have the necessary, you don't have the real life intrusions of somebody passing the pizza box around, maybe, that gets you out of the mood. Does anybody have any thoughts and feelings about this? Obviously, for streamed games, a lot of people are going further out, and they're doing makeup and the character, light cosplay sort of stuff, which was I think is a very interesting trend myself, because like when I was a gamer growing up, it was very much like, well, we don't dress up to play games, that's silly. Was like there was that kind of like that clear sort of like LARP versus tabletop divide, and I find that streamed games have like pushed that closer a little bit. But does anyone have any experience with like maybe an interesting Zoom presentation, or do we think that like around the table with a candle is still a better way to be doing horror?
I have no experience, but I think we should try that. I think you could do an amazing game of 10 candles where instead of blowing out your candle, you have to put your screen on dark. Like, so now you're dark, and the remaining players are watching all of these other players like drop out until there's just a couple of you left. I think you could do something amazing with that, but you do need a lot of buy-in from the first player who needs to put their screen on black, and then what?
Right.
I think there is a layer of separation, at least for me. I think there's a layer of separation in Zoom that kind of hinders the horror unless you have a very, very specific setup. I think that, you have just that extra layer of, I am watching this on a screen, that kind of pulls you out of it a bit. The most effective horror game I ran was, in my basement, lit by like one light, in the middle of the night. And I think that, not to sound corny, but I think that there is an atmosphere that you can't really replicate perfectly if you're doing it over Zoom.
Yeah.
For me, it depends on the platform, right? So if we are integrating the platform in with the mechanical stuff that we already have, like say, for example, ViewScream is a great example where everything is played on Zoom, and you are playing people on the ship, and that's the reason why you are all on camera, and it's because like, you are all communicating with one another on a ship through video chat. That's the reasoning why you have that. And so if there is reasoning behind why you have this, specific platform integrated into the mechanical aspects of the game, then I think that makes more sense. But like, if we were to say like, we're going to play a horror game, maybe it's like 5e, right? Like on camera, there needs to be a little bit more buy-in, or like a little bit more, more understanding of like, why are we doing this? And so I think that's one of the reasons why it does sort of remove like the horror elements, like Cody was saying. But if it was a game like ViewScream, if it was like, a text-based game, like, where you're just literally texting, and like, you're in a specific environment, then I think that would make more sense.
I think there might also be, I don't know, I think if you were a really clever designer, because we do have horror movies that are just entirely people, what's it called, Unfriended or something, with monsters. And I think if you had a really good programmer who could somehow set it up so that you're all watching and we see like a ghost behind Banana and we all freak out and she's like, what? So I think if somebody could do that, I think it could be a very powerful game experience. But I'm going to be honest, I don't think people have the resources to develop that in the tabletop RPG world. Like that is more video game budget world.
I think also the more designed a game like that for like honed into one specific experience, that does in some ways hinder its replayability. And so you might be designing a game that has like a series of like these kind of like pre-produced modules, but if people can't be like making their own stuff and also getting the same sort of effects, they might find, you're kind of making an interactive video game in some ways. And again, then there's the budget, and then they're like, well, this was cool for 6 weeks, but
Yeah.
when was the last time you saw somebody really excited about playing Fall Guys?
Yeah.
And you don't want to necessarily produce something that trends really well briefly and then craters, which
Yeah.
I mean, business.
Unless you take all of that money and invest it into your next game.
Well, sure. I mean, if you make a lot of money for 6 weeks and then it craters, you know,
Yes.
good on you.
Yes.
Not typically the pattern that is happening in tabletop or augmented table.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's. I think it would be a fun idea. I don't think you're going to get your money's worth as a designer.
Definitely a passion project. Yeah, but yeah.
A passion project by somebody who can
But I mean,
Zoom backgrounds for other people.
I mean, it sounds cool.
Very,
it sounds
very
really
niche.
cool. I'm intrigued.
If you're that
Yeah.
designer, hit me up. We'll write something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Reach out.
Business
Reach out
card
if you're the
exchange.
person who can hack Zoom backgrounds for other people.
Why don't we push forward a little bit then into kind of like wish list ideas? What would we like to see more of in horror games? What are we terrified that somebody is going to make before we have the time or ability to make it?
I mean, I'm not going to tell you.
All right, Steffie's out. Banana?
Oh gosh. I do a lot of horror comedy and dark horror comedy. Right now I'm working on a solo RPG where players are journaling, but they're also doing like a paint by numbers type of thing because they're an art forger. And so you're an art forger and you've been tasked to forge a cursed painting. And so over time, as you're like painting in this paint by numbers thing, more terrifying things happen. So that's where my mind's at right now. Just like a lot of like, how do we make solo games with artifacts and also like make it scary?
That's cool. I like the core concept.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea, Banana.
I think oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I just said thanks. No.
Oh. I'm a tremendous fan of sort of the more psychological horror, the more dread horror concept, and I love like character development. So I think it'd be really interesting to build a game in that horror concept where like every major plot beat, every major event has some like effect on your character from like a system standpoint. Basically, like you play that character, but over the course of like a single session, your character sheet itself might change substantially as your character experiences different things, sort of in that like wounds are not hit points. They actually have some unique effect on your character. Maybe you have a wounded leg and it makes you slower. Psychological effects have some effect on your character from a mechanical standpoint. I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, a bit like conditions in the Chronicles of Darkness, so not the world, but the second line. They have conditions where you, and they tie it, and I love that, they tie it to experience points. So when your condition hinders you, you get beats for it, which translates to XP. So it's not something that you get once and you get points and then you never play it again, but something that you're actively encouraged to bring up and have your character get in trouble through because you suffered psychological trauma or emotional trauma or because you can't run.
I also think it'd be interesting to tie into the real like slasher movie course of one night timeline. I think it'd be really interesting to do a TRPG that's just like no matter how many sessions you're playing, all of it happens over the course of one night.
Oh yeah.
You can really lavish in every moment of that night. You don't have to skip time or say and then we go do X. You can play out every moment because the next 3 sessions is going to be from the evening, Friday evening when we came to this cabin to party and Saturday morning when we finally escaped, kind of an Until Dawn vibe.
I
mean, the Halloween franchise made a killing out of literally it's one night. Well, it's the day, but then mostly the action all happens in a night. So I think that's a super strong concept. I think
that's super interesting because with the compacted amount of in-world time happening, like literally everything can be role played out. You know, you guys can be like, all right, so in this game, we spend 50 minutes out of character doing some planning and whatnot. And then 45 minutes is real time, you know,
Yeah.
9 o'clock to 9:45. Almost kind of thinking about it, the TV show, which wasn't a horror show, obviously, but 24, where every episode was happening in real time.
Yeah.
You could run a tabletop game in that vein. And I think
I would combine that concept with a LARP so that you can physically set a clock and the DM is going to go ahead, play. Stuff is going to happen at 9 o'clock, but go ahead, do whatever you want to do. And then at 9 o'clock and then at 10 or whatever your intervals are. I think that would make for an amazing LARP experience to just your characters. Go ahead. All you have to do is stay in this haunted mansion until morning. I'm off in the kitchen.
I also, Cody, I really like the idea of, you know, a game where your character starts out with like a good character sheet. And as things happen to them, like literally you're not changing numbers, but you're crossing things off. You're ripping things out. You know, the list of the gear that you had access to are all like little modules that you can like, oh, my bicycle got trashed. I literally do like it's literally on the floor now. And you know, then at the end of the game, you have this artifact character sheet that is like,
that's cool.
This is how I ended up, but it's not real pretty, you know? And then if the game continues, you know, next session, you can be like, well, I've put some things back. I have a new junker bicycle, or, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, I feel like there's lots of cool, quirky mechanical things that can happen in horror games. And sometimes it's hard to fully explore them because for the mechanical stuff to work, all the players need to have a good amount of buy-in for it to be properly using it. And I think all of us at some point have said, like, if everybody's bought into this, it'll be great. And I feel like the horror genre requires that more than any other genre, because tonally, you've got to keep it within a fairly tight band for it to work. Because if you have the two players that are always cracking up, or they're trying to take like a more serious horror thing and turn it into like a zany conspiracy game, then it really falls apart. And you can't scare one person in a group if the other people are not at all scared.
Yes. Yeah, nothing kills the vibe faster than that one player who's not afraid of anything. And is very vocal about not being afraid of anything. Like, why are you here then, to be honest?
Right.
Maybe this is just not your game.
And so, you know, Steffie, you've mentioned like you have like a solo journaling game. Banana, you're working on a single player game as well. And I feel like in general, games for fewer number of players are becoming more popular and are definitely being made in larger quantities right now. Is that maybe where horror games are best done in general?
I'd say a small group, but I mean, I do have a horror lab that also works. But yes, I think it's also a practical, because it's not a coincidence that we all started making solo games when the pandemic hit and nobody was allowed to meet anyone. But yeah, I do think that it's easier to scare a smaller group because we've already all said that it just takes one player who doesn't buy in. And the larger your group, the bigger the chances of having that one player.
And even not necessarily somebody being like, you know, maliciously not bought in. But if you have a group of 6 or 7 players and you've run a really great game, next week, if one of those players can't make it, the day-to-day concerns of running a tabletop game, I feel, impacts a horror game more strongly because you can't play off that person and their fears if they're literally not there.
I do. I think that gets a little tricky because you can, but once again, you need player buy-in. You know, I run a Pathfinder game, and we miss characters from time to time. And last session, they were hunting down a boogeyman, and I didn't have one of my players, so I had them dream kidnapped in a nightmare. But you know, that had to have the buy-in from the player to say, "Hey, can I kidnap you in a nightmare and pretty horribly mutilate your character in front of the other players?" You know, and you know, they said yes, but you know, it,
Yep.
it's a little tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, I ran a round robin. This was because I'm the forever DM in my group, and at one point I was like, no, I don't. I love you all. I do not want to do this anymore. So I made them do a round robin for all of them, took turns GMing. And one of the rules that we came up with is that if it's your turn to GM, your character has to be not her, because otherwise, you know, it just leads to weirdness. I'm not a fan of GM NPCs. So we came up with a variety of reasons, and it works. You can easily, because we had to remove one player each time because they were GM, and it does work. It was fine. I didn't notice any difference in how the group reacted, and that was a horror game. So I think it can work. You just need a plausible reason why people keep disappearing, and you know, given on what you play, it's very easy to say that you were working a shift, or you're studying for your exams, or your mom told you that you're grounded.
Yeah, in the horror genre, especially if the characters are younger, there's a lot of great excuses why a character might not show up. I love the idea of a character being grounded and not showing up.
Yeah.
Show
I mean,
up.
but it works for because there's a reason none of us get together anymore once you're adults, because life gets in the way. Like, no, I have to work. I have to meet my family because I don't want to, but I have to. Or I'm meeting my therapist. Or I mean, there are so many plausible reasons why, and it's a little bit trickier if you're a group of adventurers. Like, this is your job.
Right.
We go into scary places and we kill vampires. This is your job. What do you mean you have to work at the bar? But especially in like a more real world alternate universe setting, it's so easy to come up with reasons why characters are missing. I don't think that's going to break a game.
All right. That's some good thoughts about like just different ways to blend the real world into your game. And sometimes, you know, using the real world constraints to change something, maybe not drastically, but like, all right, well, we've got to I guess this session is all going to be a weird dream sequence because only two of us are here. So let's dredge into your histories, and then we will pick up next session back in the timeline. So I mean, there's a lot of ways with consenting players and players who want to do maybe out of the box things to work around some of the RL problems that plague tabletop long campaigns. Let's talk a little bit about inspiration. And as we just talked a little bit about how like sometimes like, you know, necessity is the mother of creation. Where do you go looking for ideas when you are, whether you're designing a campaign for yourself, or if you are, excuse me, if you are brainstorming for a game, or like trying to come up with ideas for a pitch to a publisher, like where's your idea mine? And you don't need to give complete access to it. Just tell people a little bit about it. Steffi, you want to start?
I pull a lot of inspiration from movies because I'm a very visual person. So when I see something that scares me, I like to figure out how do I put that in a medium that is not visual at all. Like, I mean, I could hold up a picture of the monster and it doesn't scare anyone. But yeah, so movies. And I will say books. There are a couple of horror books that were, there's TJ Kingfisher. She wrote The Hollow Ones, and she's got two horror stories. One is about you go into a war and you end up in a different world, which is terrifying. That's one of my actual nightmares. And the other one is about kind of sort of fae in the woods who do scary things. but yeah, so I will take those images and try to figure out, okay, so you have a non-interactive medium. What if I wanted to recreate an experience like this in a medium that is interactive and not visual? And then I take it from there. At least for my indie games. For my IP work, I just read the outline and then fill in the edges where they allow me to.
Feel that so much, Steffi. I am the same way with outlines from like for contract work. And yeah, like I think that movies and television, like those are such great points of inspiration. I also like to go to immersive Instagram museums. I know not a lot of people are like excited for them, but I especially love them just because they are like a space, like you go into a literal space and it is like a weird, surreal experience. So my favorites have
Banana, could you explain what an immersive Instagram is here?
Yes, absolutely. So you might be familiar with spaces like Meow Wolf or Otherworld in Columbus, Ohio, or those kinds of like museums, right? So people go to these museums usually to take photos, but what they actually are is they're just like the space that's been converted into whatever the theme is of the entire show. So the theme could be, for example, Museum of Ice Cream. It could be a room that's just like it looks like a pool that's in the middle, but it's full of sprinkles. And there's like, blobs of ice cream that you can like sit on and like, experience fully because you are actually there. The entire room has been converted into like whatever the theme is. I went to one in 2019 that was a fashion show, but like it's AI, like it's not really AI. It's like this weird like fashion show of the future where everyone had body horror elements to them. So the fashion was like this bio engineered like stuff. So like people would have frills on their neck, sort of like the collars from like the Victorian era, or like they would have like heels on their feet, but instead of like shoes, like it's actually attached to your foot. So it's like weird things like that. Like there are a lot of these experiences where they like play around with different themes. So the weird fashion show, that was definitely one. Like the body horror fashion show, that was definitely one of them. We also went to one that was called Nightmare Machine. Nightmare Machine. The original one is called Dream Machine, but Nightmare Machine, you go in and everything is just like there was like a huge pile of cockroaches that you can like sit on. There was like a clown going through just chasing everyone with like a knife, things like that. So that's a little bit where I draw my inspiration from.
And so just to be really clear, these things exist, and then you go trolling through other people's experiences with them that they have like posted to Instagram or TikTok or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So you're kind of experiencing it secondhand through them in some way?
You actually go to those places. Like they're open to a public. So the Instagram part comes in when influencers go and they take photos, and that's like for them, that's for like their own branding, but it's open to the public. Anyone can go. They're basically just museums. Like they're just museums that have been converted into like a cooler, more immersive space so that it attracts more people to go to these places.
Okay.
Yeah, we have one over here. It's called Dolores. I'm not sure if it's a museum, but yeah, you go in and you have to climb. Like you'll go into a room and there's nowhere out until you spot that there's this tiny little piece of the wall missing, and you have to crawl through it. Or at one, they put you on a bench and the room is entirely dark and there's a statue of a man, and then all of a sudden it starts moving. And that's because what you can't see from your position on the bench is that there's a hole behind him where other museum visitors are coming through, and then you start seeing movement behind the statue. And yeah, and you have to climb and you have to, it's so weird, but I love it.
Interesting.
It's like an escape room without the escaping.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, it kind of has like escape room, but no plot vibes.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So the plot is what you bring with you.
The plot is the experience you have. Yes. Part of the plot was the
Interesting.
experiences we had along the way.
I tend to mine a lot of my ideas from like scary stories on YouTube, a lot of them, like old classic campfire story type stuff, and just an inordinate amount of true crime.
Oh yeah.
I take hikes in the woods and listen to scary stories and true crime, and it's affected my psychology quite a bit, I'm sure. But it's a great source for inspiration.
Have you ever seen the show Channel Zero?
I have not.
And I want to watch it now. Tell us.
It's amazing. So it's an anthology series, and each season is based off of a different creepypasta. But they,
Okay.
when you think of like creepypastas, it's like very much like DIY. It's very much like fan-made stuff.
Yeah.
They take these stories and they turn it into like incredible works of art. Like it's it's shot like amazing. It's beautiful. There's like in the first season, there's like a child that's completely made out of teeth. And yeah, it's visually stunning.
Okay, I'm gonna check that out. Yeah.
I was just gonna say I'm Googling it now.
Yeah, I mean, I am already disgusted at the thought.
Yes.
Says something about ourselves that we have access to so much on the internet, and I am sure that all of us have, spent a late night scrolling through stuff where we're just like, oh, why? Who made this? Why did they make this? Oh, because I'm scrolling through it at 2 a.m. and they're getting ad revenue. All right, that's. I guess they're right. There is an audience for this weird baby made of teeth, and it's.
Yes.
I think it's interesting because you were mentioning earlier, Adam, that you had kind of a interesting introduction to horror. I had a very similar introduction. I growing up, I just did not want to have anything to do with horror films until I started getting into, a lot of the more, actually a lot of the like more true crime based and creepypasta stuff, and a bit more of the psychological horror aspects. And I've kind of fallen into a deep rabbit hole of it recently.
I mean, that's kind of interesting, Cody, because Steffie said earlier that one of the things that she enjoys about horror is she gets to be scared of things that are not actual scary things in our lives. And I kind of wonder, as we get a little bit older, if maybe we're looking for more escapes like that. Things that are just gonna give us a more visceral way of ignoring the world for 90 minutes and being like, no, I am going to be, into this. One thing I discovered recently, and we are going to be wrapping up here, is that when I watch TV using my Roku stick, I can pair it with my phone and use headphones to watch television. And it's so much better for everything, especially scary stuff, because you don't hear the outside world. You can't hear what your neighbor's listening to. If anyone hasn't tried that, the curling up in bed and watching the big screen TV, but just right in your ears, I find that to be really good stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm a huge fan of watching with my headphones.
Everyone, we are just about to come to an end here. So if anyone has a last few words they would like to say, projects they would like to plug, let's do that succinctly. I'm going to stop talking now. Cody, go.
Excellent. So all I can say is, if you haven't checked out the Witcher tabletop role-playing game or Cyberpunk Red, please do. And I'm working on a decent amount of stuff, but I can't talk about it. So that's me.
Banana.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for having me. You can find me on social media, on Twitter, Instagram at BananaChan Games. I'm also on TikTok and YouTube. Our latest projects, Demos Academy is a coloring book horror tabletop role-playing game, and it's got paper dolls, and you're basically going back to your old creepy boarding school, and you're going through different rooms, and it's very creepy and scary. And so that was on Kickstarter. It's no longer on Kickstarter, but we are preparing the backer kit for that. But our other game, Suburban Consumption of the Monstrous. That's like an anthology of games. That is just a bunch of like horror LARPs that you can play through with your friends, your family, or alone. We have different chapters for like different player counts. That backer kit is up, so if you want to check that out, that is available now.
Awesome.
Oh, and that's by Sadia Bees and I. Yes.
I'm Steffie. You can find me on Twitter as 100 Things I Love, and that's 100 the number. And then I have a link tree for all of my games, my indie games, my IP games. I'm available for hire to design and to write. So yeah, come find me.
All right. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us. A reminder that we are supporting a charity, Don't Be a Monster. So you should see the donation links in the chat or on the website. And for everyone here, I'm Adam Jury signing off.